Hi, I'm Sarah. This is Turn Back Time, day 57. I'm still a loser. Lost a third of a pound overnight. Lost a quarter of an inch off my hips. Still losing. Today I weighed in at 174 pounds dead and I'm into the 78s for the kilos. So nothing but good news. I didn't get to exercise today and then found I actually missed it. I really like doing it now. It's just so hard to find the time, but I'm forcing myself. Something interesting I read today is that you should not exercise to exhaustion. When your body says, okay, I think that's enough, stop. This goes back to the alkaline-acid balance I talked about. Exercising to the point where your heart rate goes up and you sweat is alkalizing for the body. But pushing yourself to where you're dizzy and maybe feel nauseous and feel like you just need to fall on the floor is an indication that acid has been released into your body. You lose whatever energy resources that you still had, and the uncomfortable feeling is your body screaming at you to stop. In terms of keeping your body alkaline, it's counterproductive to do too much exercise. So as our grandparents always said, everything in moderation. As we continue to pick through our food sources, I wanted to just take a few minutes to discuss GMO foods. I've mentioned them a few times along the way during this podcast, but I'm not sure people understand the true extent of what GMO means. There are positive factors to GMO crops. Scientists will tell you they can withstand drought and diseases, making them more accessible to consumers in arid areas, for instance. They require less pesticide, they grow faster, bigger, and in greater quantities and last longer on the supermarket shelves. Regarding pesticides, a study in 1933 estimated that farmers lost a third of their crops to insects. Nearly 90 years on, despite an enormous amount of pesticides that have been sprayed on our soils, to the point that they really are massively degraded. A recent study showed that farmers now lose a third of their crops to insects. No difference. All that risk for no change. So are GMO practices essential economically, or misguided, or downright dangerous? Given what we know now regarding each individual fruit or vegetable, in terms of what essential vitamins, minerals, and other substances each brings to the human body, and how intricately nature is interwoven to sustain life, what does mixing the genetic material of different organisms do to that balance? One GMO experiment had been to alter the genetic makeup of rice so it will increase vitamin A in consumers by inserting a beta-carotene gene from corn into the rice plant. But what does that do to the normal nutrients in the rice? No one knows yet. And did we really need fish genes in tomatoes? The scientists believed it would make them freeze-proof, but it didn't work. And they were never sold. But it's an example, perhaps, of that old adage as well, just because you can doesn't mean you should. And what happens when certain plants are infested with strange viruses to ward off insects, and then we eat them? Scientists are using a biological nanoparticle, basically a plant virus, to try to deliver pesticides deep down into the soil, rather than just spraying them on the top. But what does that do to the soil that's already damaged by our intensive farming practices? One scientist at San Diego School of Engineering said, and I quote, "Pesticides are very sticky molecules which bind strongly to organic matter in the soil." She said this makes the soil hard to penetrate, so now they need to use the plants themselves to push the pesticides underneath that barrier. Does no one understand any long-term consequences in these labs? The aim is to save money, of course, like they genetically altered the enzymes in certain crops so that they didn't die when Roundup pesticides were sprayed on them. It worked for a while, but now the weeds all around the crops have become superweeds, Roundup resistant, and they have to spray more and more on these weeds to try to kill them, costing more money, and the pesticide is still being sprayed all over the food that you're going to eat. and now in greater quantities. It just doesn't kill them. Despite this, GMO food producers insist all GMO practices are perfectly safe. But a Pew Research Centre study in 2020 showed half of the population in 20 countries around the world believe GMO foods are unsafe to eat. Of the other half, an extra 37% said they weren't sure. So 87% combined, only 13% were happy to eat them. In Russia, 70% said they wouldn't touch it. The US Department of Agriculture has warned that without GMO products, the world will starve. A USDA undersecretary told a European Union farming think tank that its concerns about GMO would contribute to world famine. So new practices are being developed, one which would allow scientists to edit the existing genes of an organism rather than inserting foreign ones. But be in no doubt, that means altering DNA. That technology is in its infancy, and again, what will it do to the nutritional content of something that the human body already relies on? It's not always possible to know that the food that you're eating is not GMO. In the US, the FDA does require food manufacturers to write it on packaging, but it's a directive, it's not backed by any law, and the label won't say GMO but bioengineered. Also, if you're buying organic, make sure it says 100% organic. Otherwise, there may well be GMO substances, even in organic food, and this applies in the US, the EU, and the UK. In the UK, if a food is produced using a genetically modified method, like using GMO enzymes to clot cheese, no one has to be told. And if animals you eat are fed GMO feed, the producer does not have to tell you. Great. How on earth do we negotiate it? Well, at least we're educating ourselves on it so we can be wary. See you tomorrow.